I want to propose that there's a deeper unity that the psalmist is inviting us into. I want to propose that the unity that the psalmist is beckoning us into is a unity that is rooted in a shared experience of God's grace and God's rescue and ultimately of God's love. Remember that Psalm 133, it's a psalm of ascent. It's a song that's sung as the people are making their way to the temple to worship. It's a song that's tied to festivals and to holy days, days that were set aside for the people of God to remember the saving acts of God, chiefly the deliverance of God's people from slavery. This would have been a song sung as Israel made their way to remember God's liberation of them. This was a song that they sung as they gathered to worship God in remembrance of God's salvific acts. Given the context of Psalm 133 and given the context of its singing and of its usage, it seems that the unity that the psalmist is wanting to lift up is a unity that is found in the shared experience of a people who have been saved. When we read this psalm back through the lens of Jesus, we can rightfully hear the words of Psalm 133 saying to us that it's good and pleasant and joyous for us to dwell together in unity and celebration, that we are a people who have been rescued and who together with others likewise who have experienced the rescue of God in Christ. It's good and pleasant for us to dwell together in unity in the celebration that we are people who have been embraced by God, who have experienced God's love, who have experienced God's healing and God's liberation, and are together with others likewise who have experienced the love of God and who have likewise experienced God's freedom and embrace and healing. That's the thing that unites us in this room, friends. The fact that we are a people who have experienced God's love and God's salvation. That we are a people who have in some measure experienced God's healing and have been captivated by God's vision of God's kingdom that's been deposited in us individually and collectively. That's why it's good and pleasant for us to be together. It's because we are those that have placed our faith and trust in Jesus, and that's transformed our lives. Now realize that all of us, we've got maybe some different stories about how that's happened. I think some of our stories, maybe they're like the Apostle Paul's. Paul was on the road to Damascus and he encounters Jesus in this fantastical and dramatic way. He's knocked off his donkey. He's blinded by the radiance of the resurrected Christ, and his life is dramatically changed in a moment. Others of our stories, maybe they're like Nicodemus, who first comes to Jesus at night and in secret and talks to him, reasons with him over and over after meeting with Jesus, defends him later in a crowd, sort of, and then finally is at Jesus' crucifixion. It's a slow progression into faith for Nicodemus. It doesn't happen all at once in the ways that it did for Paul. Nicodemus' relationship with Jesus, it took time. It wasn't in a singular moment. It was in a series of moments that culminated in Nicodemus surrendering to the love that he experienced in Jesus. I think maybe for others of us, it's more like Timothy's story in the New Testament. Timothy was a young pastor in Ephesus that Paul writes to in the book of Ephesians and 1st and 2nd Timothy. Timothy was raised by and discipled by his mother and grandmother, who were both Christians. And Timothy followed in their faith footsteps. We all have different journeys with Jesus, but at the end of it, what it is an experience of God's love in Christ. An experience of God's welcome and God's embrace, maybe in one dramatic moment, maybe in a series of moments, and maybe you're in a part of that story at somewhere in the middle. Or maybe it's God's slow work through faithful family saints that have shown you what Jesus' love is like. All of which are invitations to embrace God's love and God's rescue. And that is the foundation of unity for the people of God. This is our foundation, Christ City. I think any other forms of unity for us as a church, unity of belief or doctrine or vision or mission in the world, any of those things that hold us, they're just far downstream from our shared experience as those that have been saved and that have been healed and that have been liberated by Jesus. It is God's love that holds us. And it's from that unity that we can move out into a world with a message of God's love and any display of God's love.